Hey guys, Miss Fearon here. Welcome to Unit 3, Notes 5, which deals with our last exponent property, negative exponents. So today our learning target is I can simplify expressions with negative exponents. So we've looked at properties for multiplying powers, we've looked at properties for dividing exponents, when we have a power to a power, and when our exponent is 0. So the only thing we haven't talked about is what we're going to look at next, which is negative exponents. So when we're dealing with negative exponents, the rule is to invert the location of the term with the negative exponent and make the exponent positive. So basically, the way that I look at it is if it's negative, you cross the line and change the sign. So if I have a to the negative 4, we can remember that this is like saying I can put a 1 under anything and it doesn't change it. So if I want this, a to the negative 4, to become positive, we bring it down to the bottom. So we would say it would be a to the positive 4 on the bottom then, and I would be done. So remember with negative exponents, you flip the location of just the variable with the negative exponent. Okay, so if it's not negative, we don't want to move it. We want it to stay right where it is. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples here. Example number 1, I have 4a to the negative 2. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make this a fraction because it's not a fraction yet. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put a 1 under it. Now, that a to the negative 2 is bothering me. I want to get rid of that negative first before I can do anything else. So to make that a positive, remember it crosses the line and then it changes its sign. So the 4 is still going to stay on top. That doesn't have a negative exponent. That's not attached to the a to the negative 2. Those are two separate things. The a to the negative 2 is what's going to come down, and it's going to change to a positive because we moved it. There is nothing else I can do in this problem. There's only one coefficient, 1a. I'm good to go. That's my final answer. So number 2 is kind of the exact same thing. That x to the negative 1, I don't like that to be a negative, so I want to move that. It's going to cross the line and change the sign. Everything else needs to stay where it is because they're not negative. So I'm still going to have 1, x to the 1 now, divided by that 3 has to stay on the bottom because that does not have a negative power. So for number 3 and 4, I want you to go ahead and I want you to try doing the same kind of idea that we've been doing. If it has a negative power, it needs to cross the line and change the sign. Everything else that has a positive exponent, they need to stay right where they are. So try number 3 and 4, and then come back and check your work. So here's what I got for number 3 and 4. Number 3, you can have the 1 underneath as a fraction and leave it that way, or you can get rid of it. Whichever way you have it is completely fine. But you have to make sure that the a, b squared are on top of a fraction then, or on top of the division bar. Number 4 then, the b to the negative 3 and the a to the negative 2, those were both negatives. So we had to flip both of them. Remember though, the 4 has a positive 1 exponent. So since it's positive, we don't want to move that 1 at all. It has to stay exactly where it is. If you got those ones wrong, come chat with me before moving forward. So you looked at these properties of simplified monomials the other day in lesson 4. So we talked about how to make sure that when you are actually finished, you know that you have each base only appearing once. There's no power to a power, so no parentheses. All fractions are in simplest form. And then we're going to add the new one today of no negative exponents. So even though this list puts the no negative exponents first, I usually get rid of the negatives before I deal with the multiplication or the division of the same bases. So let's look at number 7 here. I have two things that are negative, that b and that d. They're both negative, so I need to get rid of those negatives first. That's always my first job. That's what I look for first. So I want to cross those and then simplify from there. So the d to the 5th is going to go on top. The c squared is going to stay there. It was positive. I don't want to flip that at all. And then the b to the 3rd is going to move to the bottom before coming positive. So I'm going to look, there's no coefficients to deal with. Each base only appears once. There's no negatives and no parentheses. So my answer is that, and I am done. Number 8. Now be very, very careful. It shows a negative 3 up here, but that is a negative 3. That is not 3 to a negative power. So that does not have to flip. That's a coefficient. We're going to go ahead and we're going to simplify those. But before I do any of that, I want to get rid of the negatives. I want to move the negatives. So the a to the negative 4th has to go to the bottom, and the c to the negative 5th is going to move to the top. So I'm going to have negative 3 b to the 7th, c to the 5th, divided by 21 a squared b to the 7th, a to the 4th, because we had to bring that a to the negative 4 down to make it positive. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to simplify the coefficients, simplify the b's, simplify the a's, and then be done. So I'm going to look at negative 3 and 21, and I want to think what number goes into both of those. I know that a 3 goes into both of them. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a 3 out of that. So that's going to become a negative 1, and the 21 is going to become a 7. Now, I want to go ahead and I want to look at my a's. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. I have an a squared and an a to the 4th, and they're both on the bottom of my fraction. So that technically means I'm multiplying them. And remember, when you multiply, you add. So I get 2 plus 4, which is going to give me a to the 6th. Now I'm going to deal with my b's. I have a b to the 7 divided by a b to the 7. So when I have to divide, I subtract. So I get b to the 7 minus 7, which is going to be 0. So those technically cancel each other out. The only thing I'm left with then is the c to the 5th. That's on the top, so I want to keep it on the top. There's no parentheses. My numbers are the smallest they can go. Each base appears once, so I'm done with that problem. All right, number 9 here. Let's go ahead and look at this one. Remember, the first thing I always do is I want to get rid of those negative exponents, the negative powers. So this q to the negative 2 is going to move down. The r to the negative 3 and the s to the negative 5 are going to move up on top. Everything else needs to stay right where it is because those all have positive exponents, so we don't want to move them. So I'm going to have a negative 3 on top still. Also on top, I still had an r and the s to the 4th. So now the things I'm moving up to top to make them positive are going to be the r to the 3rd and the s to the 5th. Now, the things that are staying on the bottom is the negative 12 and that q. The only thing that's moving to the bottom then is a q to the 2nd, because when it crosses a line, we have to make it a positive. We have to change that sign. So now, just like all of our other problems, we're going to go through this piece by piece. So I'm going to deal with the coefficients first. So I know that numbers that go into a negative 3 and a negative 12 is going to be a negative 3. So a negative 3 goes into a negative 3 once, and a negative 3 goes into a negative 12 4 times. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this in alphabetical order. So I'm going to look at the q's first. They're both on the bottom of my fraction, so I want to go ahead and I'm looking at that as multiplying. So when we multiply, we add those powers. So I have q to the 1 times q squared, which gives me q to the 1 plus 2. So I get q to the 3. Deal with my r's next now. I have r to the 1, remember that's an imaginary 1, and r to the 3. Again, they're both on the top of the fraction, so we're going to multiply those, which means we're adding the powers. So I'm going to end up with r to the 4th. And the same thing with the s's. They're both on the top of the fraction, so we're going to go ahead and multiply them. So I'm going to get an s to the 4th plus 5, which is going to give me s to the 9th. Each base only appears once. The numbers are as small as they can go. There's no power to a powers, and there's no negatives, so that's my final answer. I'm done. Now I want you to take a look at number 10. I want you to try it on your own and see what you can do. There's no hurt in trying it. You're always going to come back and check your answer next. But remember, start with moving the negative powers around. So moving the things with negatives, cross the line, change their sign, and then take it piece by piece. All right, so I go ahead and I got negative 4, y to the 6th, z to the 1, x to the 1. If you got something different at all, come chat with me before moving forward. Make sure you really understand these so that when you get to that quiz, you're set and you're ready to go. All right, number 11 here. I have a whole thing to a negative power. So we're going to treat these just like the other ones we did. We want to go ahead and we want to deal with simplifying inside the parentheses first. So inside the parentheses, I have a c squared on top, and that's the only one I have, so that's going to stay on top. And then I have d to the 1 and a d to the 5th. So remember, I always do the bigger number minus the smaller number, so d to the 1 minus, or 5 minus 1 is going to give me d to the 4th. And the bigger number of those was on the bottom, so they're going to stay on the bottom. Now I have this whole thing to the negative 1. So anytime you want to go ahead and you want to change this exponent to be a positive, you just have to flip everything on the inside of the parentheses. So what's on the bottom goes to the top, what's on the top goes to the bottom. So that means that the d to the 4th is going to be on top, and the c squared is going to be on the bottom, and I am done with that. So number 12 is the same kind of idea. We want to simplify what's inside the parentheses first before we deal with that negative exponent. So I have a 3, that's my only coefficient, so that's going to stay on top. I have an x squared and an x divided by an x to the 1. So I want to subtract those. 2 minus 1 gives me x to the 1. And the bigger number of those is on top, so that's going to stay on top. And then I have that y to the 5th. It's the only y base I have, so that's going to stay on the bottom. All to the negative 2. So we need to make that negative 2 a positive before we start distributing it through. So I'm going to go ahead and to make it positive, I'm just going to flip everything inside the parentheses. So the y to the 5th goes to the top, and the 3x goes to the bottom. Now that 2 becomes positive, and we can go ahead and we can give that 2 to everything on the inside of the parentheses. So when you have a power to a power, remember you're multiplying. So I'm going to end with a y to the 5 times 2, which is 10, divided by 3 to the 1 times 2, which is 3 squared, and then x to the 1 times 2, which is x squared. My final answer, remember, is I need to simplify that 3 squared. So I need to go ahead and make that a 9. So I'm going to end up with a y to the 10 divided by 3 squared, 9, x squared, and I'm done. So we're going to look at our last 2 examples here. Number 13, we're going to go ahead and again deal with what's inside the parentheses first. So I want to make this negative become a positive before we go ahead and simplify anything. So that's going to move to the bottom. So the y is going to stay on top. I'm now going to have an x to the 3rd and an x to the 5th, all to the negative 1. I still have some simplifying inside the parentheses that I can do. I have 2 x's. So since they're both on the bottom of the fraction, that tells me I'm multiplying them. And when you multiply, you add. So I'm going to get 3 plus 5. The y is going to stay on top, and I'm going to get x to the 8th, all to the negative 1. Now remember, to make this positive, we just flip everything inside the parentheses. So the x to the 8th is going to come to the top, the y is going to go to the bottom, and that's going to be my final answer. I'm done. So number 14, this one's a little tricky. I want you to go ahead and try this one on your own. Come back, check your answer, see what you got before moving forward. So my final answer I got for 14 was 9 over 4x to the 4th y to the 6th. You really have to take this one slow and do it piece by piece. So move and simplify the inside of the fraction, or inside the parentheses first. Then simplify coefficients, x's, y's. To make that negative 2 positive, you have to flip the entire fraction and then distribute the positive to everything. Really, really take these step by step. Don't try to do it all at once, and really take your time on them. Go ahead and try the practice for today. When you have questions, or if you have questions, come and chat with me. Make sure you really understand this before moving forward.